Hello, and thank you for joining another video for Housing Group through Women's Advocates. I'm Nisha, one of the housing advocates.
I'm Ani, the other housing advocate. This morning, we're joined by Standpoint, and they are going to talk about all the services that they offer.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having us, Nisha and Ani. We are so happy to be here. My name is Raylene, and I'm a housing advocate with Standpoint.
And my name is Anne. I'm a housing attorney here with Standpoint.
Perfect. So we're going to talk a little bit about who Standpoint is, what we do, and how we can be helpful for folks. So just a little bit of background on Standpoint. First, we were formerly known as the Battered Women's Legal Advocacy Project. And we have since changed our name to Standpoint because we serve all victim survivors of domestic and sexual violence and sex trafficking. We are a statewide organization, so we don't work just in St. Paul, which is where our office is there, but we serve the entire state of Minnesota. And we are also free regardless of income levels or anything along those lines. So we're able to work with folks. We don't have to think about an intake. We don't have to ask any questions about income, anything along those lines. We're able to help. And that's just a little tiny bit about Standpoint and what we do.
Standpoint mission is to promote justice for domestic and sexual violence victims. We serve all victims, like Raylene said, all victims of domestic and sexual violence across the state of Minnesota, regardless of immigration or refugee status or nationality or citizenship or race or ability or gender identity. We serve all victims. Again, our services are free regardless of income and no intake is required. We use an attorney advocate model here at Standpoint, where the attorneys and advocates work together to provide a more comprehensive experience for the clients. The goal of our model is to combine the unique expertise of advocates and attorneys. When we work together, we really share our knowledge and learn from each other in order to provide efficient, trauma-informed legal support. Standpoint services can be grouped into three main parts. We have an action line. We provide representation or direct services, and we do a lot of training. Standpoint's action line is where we spend a lot of our time and effort. The action line is available to victim survivors of domestic or sexual violence or anyone supporting victim survivors, whether that be family or friends or advocates. Most of the calls that we get on the action line are from victim survivors directly, but we do provide a lot of legal support for advocates across Minnesota, and we get calls from attorneys or other professionals who are working with victim survivors and who need some expert advice. Representation is when, or direct services is when Standpoint attorneys represent Standpoint clients in their legal matter. Standpoint attorneys occasionally provide either full rep or limited representation, depending on the client, depending on the situation. So when we think about full representation, that's the norm for what we think of when an attorney is hired to represent a client in their issue. In those cases, the attorney performs all of the tasks necessary for the completion of the case. Limited representation is a little bit different. That's when an attorney performs a limited amount of the work needed for the completion of the case, and we don't directly represent them in court or in other settings. So for an example, an attorney in providing limited representation, they might draft a court pleading, like maybe a motion form, or maybe write a demand letter, and then the client takes that and to pursue their legal claim. So the attorney does the writing, does the work kind of behind the scenes, and then the client takes that to either file it with the court or send a demand letter in their own name. We also can review documents for callers on our action line, either documents they received or that they're going to send. Sometimes it's court documents, sometimes it's letters. We do a lot of that kind of thing too. Another big part of what Standpoint does is training. Our advocates and attorneys work together to provide training on a variety of topics related to the legal issues commonly faced by victim survivors. We do monthly webinars. We have an annual 2-day training series that we call New Laws, and we offer other trainings as requested.
Awesome. So I think that most of you kind of know what an advocate is, but just so we're all on the same page, when we think of advocates and folks that are working with victim survivors of violence, generally speaking, advocates are offered free of charge. And Standpoint advocates and women's advocates are also, everyone is not charging for these services. So advocates are free. They have special protections in terms of confidentiality, and so that your information being shared with them is safe to be shared. And generally speaking, advocates are providing support. So they're talking about different options. They're talking about these hard topics that people are facing, and kind of helping folks move through that in a way that's trauma informed and is respectful of meeting everyone where they're at. And advocacy is really tailored to the individual. And I think for me, the most important thing when I think about advocacy is that it's non-judgmental. We're all going through very different things. And, when we're experiencing domestic and sexual violence, there's a lot of big feelings. So the role of an advocate really is to be non-judgmental, to hear that story and not pass any judgment and not tell folks what they should or shouldn't do. And I think that being an advocate is a really special spot. And I'm really honored to fill that role. And I think that hopefully you're finding advocates that are helpful for you. And I know Women's Advocates is super great. So I'm glad that you get to work with them. We'll talk a little bit also about what advocates can do. So there's lots of different kinds of advocates. Here at Standpoint, we are called legal advocates. So we are focusing on legal issues. So that might mean, and different agencies have different ideas of what a legal advocate looks like. At Standpoint, we are focusing mostly on our action line, which you've heard about as well. But there are advocates at other agencies that can go to court with folks. They can help write orders for protection. They can do other things in terms of supporting people through a legal process. Sometimes that's criminal related, hopefully housing related as well, and other things too. There are medical advocates, so folks that, not right now during times of COVID, but outside of COVID times, would be able to support someone in a hospital setting or medical setting to provide advocacy, whether that's supportive services, referring to resources, or just being there through an exam that might be particularly painful or traumatic, and connecting folks with needed resources. I am also a housing advocate, so my issues that I focus on, yes, we talk about orders for protection and other things that legal advocates do, but I specifically focus on housing. And we'll talk more about what I do a little bit later. But housing advocates are essential in helping folks connect to housing resources and things like that. And you've got your own wonderful housing advocates to work with. Advocates also help folks think about issues in terms of employment, and that can be in terms of job searching and looking at resumes, or there are sometimes civil suits that go through employment if there's been harassment or discrimination and things like that, and advocates can help navigate that process. There are also advocates that work on Title IX issues, so in the academic setting, either K through 12 or in higher ed. There are instances where advocates can help folks navigate Title IX. And then generally speaking, advocates are also able to provide short-term counseling or crisis counseling, whether that's over the phone, nowadays probably in Zoom. The video that we're doing today is hopefully helpful as well. And then doing some support groups. Again, everything looks super different in times of COVID, but this is kind of the wide range of services and things that advocates can help people with. And so that's, things that Standpoint advocates do and folks at Women's Advocates and other agencies.
Right now at Standpoint, we have 6 attorneys with various specialties. So like I mentioned, our attorneys provide varying levels of legal services, ranging from giving legal advice on the phone to callers on our action line or through email, or providing, all the way to the other end of that spectrum, providing full representation in certain cases. This is a list of some of the areas that we see a lot and we have some expertise in. So it could be protective orders, confidentiality and privilege. I do the housing work. We have, issues around mandated reporting. Immigration, we have an immigration attorney, so she works with those issues. We do a lot of advising on family law issues, custody and things like that. This is not a complete list. It's just an example to give you of the wide variety, an idea of the wide variety of the work that we do. If one thing I think is important too, if someone calls, the action line and needs legal advice and we don't necessarily have the answer, the attorneys will take the time to either find the answer or connect you with an attorney or connect the caller with an attorney who can provide the answer that is needed. So Raylene and I together are the housing team at Standpoint. We work together to provide support, legal support to victim survivors of domestic and sexual violence across the state. Depending on who we're working with in a specific situation, this could mean that the callers talk to Raylene and get advocacy only, or it could mean they talk with Raylene for a minute, but what they really need is legal advice. So then they end up mainly getting just legal advice. Often it's a combination of the two where Raylene and I work together, to help the client or the caller figure out or resolve the issue that they're calling for. One thing that I think is important to note when we talk about housing law in particular is we mean issues related to the landlord-tenant relationship or any other issues faced by renters. And this includes residents of any property who do not have a formal rental agreement, either orally or in writing, or maybe someone that's a resident somewhere, but they're not on the lease. All of those people fall under this sort of housing law umbrella. Many people in these situations believe they don't have tenant protections, but in most cases they do. So anytime we're dealing with a situation where the client has been living somewhere but doesn't own the property, we want to take a close look to see if those legal tenant protections apply, and most of the time they do. So that's just an important thing to take note of, so you don't have, so you don't miss out on some legal protections that might be available.
All right, so we just wanted to give a little bit of insight on how that housing team works and how the advocate attorney model works. So typically speaking, if someone were to call our action line, that phone is going to be answered by an advocate. So if someone's calling, I'm taking that phone call and I'm talking with someone about the story. What is happening? What's going on? What kind of questions do you have for us? And when that comes to housing, that might look like needing to break a lease. That might look like questions about the eviction moratorium that's currently in place. It could be lots of different issues. And so I'll get that information and I will do safety planning. We'll talk about different referrals to make. I often refer folks to women's advocates, lots of different community-based resources that people might be in need of to increase their safety in whatever ways that looks like. Again, I'm specifically related to housing, so we might talk about lock changes, things like that. Then as I'm talking to that person, if I realize, ooh, you know what, this might be a legal issue, this is a time for Anne to get involved. So what I would do is I would transfer that call to Anne or get the caller and Anne connected. And from there, Anne can talk to the caller about whatever that legal issue might be. Anne can provide that legal advice and kind of work toward resolution of whatever that question might be. So that person might get some education about what their issue is, some different options, different legal options that they might have, things like that. Then as Anne is doing that work, maybe something else comes up in that phone call where an advocate would be more helpful. Maybe this person didn't mention that they were interested in an order for protection, or maybe they need some resources for something that I just didn't talk with them about. Or I can also help folks do some follow-up on some of the things that Anne has talked with them about. So if they're looking for documentation or they need help trying to figure out who to contact, like if they're looking for the Attorney General or whatever that resource might be, Anne is welcome to transfer them right back to me. And then I can continue doing advocacy work. Situations change all the time. Safety needs change all the time. So maybe Anne is directly connecting them back to me. Maybe they're calling back 3 days later. And then again, because the situation might change again, or they talked with their landlord and have new information, then I might transfer them right back to Anne. So it's really kind of this circular process where we really work in tandem together, so that we're providing the full range of services that both an advocate and an attorney are able to provide. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of how that process works. There are some examples of things that we're working on with folks. Could be drafting a letter to terminate a lease due to fear of violence. So there's a statute that allows people to break a lease if they are in fear for their safety. We are talking with folks about eviction expungement. and also security deposit demand letters. If someone didn't receive their security deposit back for whatever reason, Anne can look into that and help them draft a letter. We of course provide phone advice. That's a big piece of what Standpoint does, is talking with people over the phone. So talking them through landlord-tenant legal issues that might have come up. It doesn't have to be specific to, you know, the people that we're working with are victim survivors, but the issue might be about a parking spot or something like that. And so we can definitely provide that information there. And then also thinking about eviction defense. And I will let Anne answer any questions about that, because that is definitely an attorney thing. But Anne, anything else to add to this slide and how we kind of work together?
Yeah, a couple things. One thing I think of that's really important in the way that we work together is when you're like, for example, if you're going to be talking to someone and you're going to transfer that call to me, you can take the time to give me the background, to tell me the story, so that we can make, you know, so the client or the caller doesn't have to repeat themselves over and over, which I think is a really important part and a really important reason to why we do it, to the way we do it. So it does give the caller the option, you know, to kind of limit how many times they have to go through that story. Another place where I see that this attorney advocate model is really important is when I'm doing full representation work. So when I'm representing a client and gathering all that information that I need to be able to work on a case, I have to ask really direct and specific questions. Timelines and details are important. You know, I have to think about it in this really specific legal kind of way. And of course, it's no surprise probably to most of you that the law is not exactly trauma informed. So when going through this process, having an advocate there, having Raylene there is a really big deal. It's a really helpful way for me to be able to get the information I need while also making sure that we're taking care and we're being trauma informed, and we're making sure that the process doesn't, you know, hopefully doesn't add, you know, additional trauma to the situation. So I think that's a really important part of how we work together.
Excellent. So that was kind of the big overview of what Standpoint does and what the housing team does. We are always welcome to answer questions. Feel free to give us a call on the action line. We've got some information there with our contact info. So we love talking with people about housing issues or other legal questions that you might have. So do feel free to give us a call. We answer our action line Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So we kind of run on court hours, essentially. We also have a text line as well that you can see on the screen there. So feel free to send a text. Just know that if you need to speak with an attorney, they won't text you back. They got to talk on the phone for that one. But feel free to text to kind of maybe set up a time or kind of find out who you should speak with or whatever. That also works really well. And then Nisha, I think you had some final thoughts for us.
I do. Thank you, Raylene. So thank you all so much for taking the time to watch this video. And please do not forget to take the quiz at the end for points towards your certificate of completion. You all have a great day.